Welcome back. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. These words were uttered by Robert Oppenheimer as a descriptor of his thoughts on the Trinity test, a test that would change the world and the way that it's run forever. Oppenheimer was quoting an ancient Hindu scripture from the Bhagavad Gita, which he learned Sanskrit just to read in the original language. He would go on to indicate more than once that humanity had likely been here before, and he, like his perceived predecessors, now held the power of life and death in his hands. Welcome to the Occult and Apocalypse with Kristen, aka Fire Terra Mama, where I tell you how they took what was once widely known about God, spirituality, and you, and how they took that and locked it away. Come with me while I tell you what I've learned from science and religion and cultural beliefs and mythology to turn the occult and the apocalypse into just the hidden and the revealed. Now, he is quoted as having said it for certain. There's even a video on it. But he says that when the first successful atomic bomb, the Trinity test, was successful, it was the first thing that came to his mind. Oppenheimer spent the rest of his life lobbying against the creation and use of nuclear weapons. And when he realized that was a losing battle, he lobbied for international control over their use and development. But why that quote? Why those scriptures? Well, he definitely said it in an interview with NBC when discussing the successful Trinity test. He was also known to quote another verse from the Bhagavad Gita. He said, if the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst into the sky at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the Mighty One. Now, the results of the Trinity test left a 10-foot deep, 1,000-foot wide crater in the middle of the New Mexican desert. It created a mushroom cloud that went up 8 miles high, and the short fallout was within 100 miles, and the long fallout within 1,000 miles. And seemingly never before seen green glass formed of the heat of the blast. It was called Trinitite due to the name of the test. Now, it's not new that sand turns to glass when it's struck by high heat like lightning, but its formation was never before seen, as were its colors and composition. It's said that the Trinitite made the crater more radioactive than expected, and it's said that the majority was formed when the sand melted into the fireball and rained down in liquid form. Soon after the Trinity test, the United States determined, unfortunately, that nuclear bombs were more effective if detonated above the ground, and the 2 bombs set off in Japan did not leave those types of craters in the earth. And remember that, because we'll need that later. Now, it's said when giving a lecture at Rochester University, Oppenheimer was asked, was the bomb that exploded at Alamodorado during the Manhattan Project the first one to be detonated? To which Oppenheimer responded, well, yes, in modern times, of course. Now, this is a largely anecdotal story. However, I haven't found anything that disputes it. Now, does that make it true? No. But it would make sense based on his study and frequent quoting of ancient Hindu scriptures. And it wouldn't be a huge stretch of the imagination that he would say it. Like I told you before, Robert studied the Vedic scriptures in their original Sanskrit. He was, to the best of our knowledge, due to his public life, raised Jewish and never openly practiced Hinduism. But he did learn an entirely foreign language in order to read the scriptures in their natural language. He also told a Christian magazine that when they asked him what books had been most influential on his life, the Bhagavad Gita was amongst the top. Now, in the Mahabharata, which is roughly 10 times the Iliad and the Odyssey together, it's actually a Vedic text that is the longest poem in history, and it was orally told or sung by charioteer bards. Oppenheimer was very acquainted with this text, and within it, there are two weapons described. The first was Brahmastra, and it's described as a fiery weapon that creates a fireball which roared and created big flames. Setting this weapon off, quote, caused everything in existence to shiver violently. The sky fills with fire and smoke, rivers evaporate, and entire armies are slaughtered in one blow. The other weapon was even more destructive. This was the Brahmashirasta. This weapon could kill gods or devas. It caused chain reactions of massive explosions and waves that could end the universe itself. In the Mahabharata, it says it blazes with a terrible flames within a huge sphere of fire. Numerous peals of thunder to be heard. Fissures start on the earth. Rivers become dry. Thousands of meteors fell, and all living creatures became terrified with great dread. The entire sky seemed to be filled with noise and assumed a terrible aspect with flames of fire. The whole earth and her mountains and waters and trees trembled. It's said that when it hits an area, it will be destroyed and nothing will ever grow there, even a blade of grass, for 155.5 trillion years. It certainly sounds like a powerful, explosive bomb, to be honest. And the descriptions of these and the effects of them sound like the reports from the Trinity test and from the bombs that were dropped in Japan. These are the same texts that speak of Vimanas, the flying machines that we've talked about in a previous episode. But these aren't the only texts that refer to things that could sound like an atomic blast. There are many who have thought that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, with the raining down of brimstone and hellfire, sounded like a massive weapon. Add in Lot's wife having turned to a pillar of salt, which sounds familiar to the descriptions of the victims in Japan. Now, is that enough proof? Of course not. But then there's the mysterious sheets of glass found in Africa in some part of the Levant. You remember earlier I told you about trinitite. Well, the only other thing that can melt sand this way are meteor strikes. Now, we know the Earth has had plenty of meteor strikes, but in Africa, in the Great Sand Sea, about 72,000 square kilometers of rolling dunes of sand, there are sheets and scattered pieces of green glass that are essentially the equivalent to trinitite. It's called Libyan glass, and it's found all over this area. Some of the glass is laid out in sheets and others more like scattered stones. It's essentially considered exactly the same as trinitite, only naturally made. It was used to make sharp tools and even decorative jewelry that was used by King Tut, who is the third to last ruler of the 18th dynasty in Egypt. It was rediscovered in 1922. The most interesting thing about this is because its creation is without an impact crater. It's assumed that it would have to have been a meteor that exploded as an airburst. But was it really? It's not a smoking gun, but it might spark your interest to know that as the story goes, in 1922, archaeologists were sent to a different site in the Indus Valley civilization by a Buddhist monk in modern-day Pakistan. There are two cities relatively close together in the region, and both showed similar results. One of these cities is Mohenjo-Daro. It's said that the bodies were found in the middle of the streets. They were exposed, unburied, and some still holding hands. The city was built around 2600 BC and abandoned about 1500 BC. In 1966, Riddles of Ancient History, Alexander Gavorsky reported on something really bizarre about this site. It was radioactive, and not just a little. It was said to have 50 times greater radioactivity than what should have naturally occurred. They also found something called black stones. These black stones were clay vessels which would had to have reached heat of 2,550 to 2,910 degrees Fahrenheit. Both cities showed evidence of massive fire or possible explosions at the center of each. Now, I'm not sure if I said it before, but the Trinity test reached temperatures of at least 2,678 degrees Fahrenheit. And if that's not enough to convince you, there's the story of Albion Hart. He's said to have been one of the first engineers to graduate from MIT. There's an article in Rocks and Minerals number 396, written in 1972 by Marguerite Casson. This article details Albion's experience with trinitite and Libyan glass. It's quoted to say, "At the time he was puzzled and quite unable to explain the large expanse of greenish glass which covered the sands as far as they could see. Later on during his life he passed by the White Sands area after the first atomic exploding there, and he recognized the same type of silica fusion which he had seen 50 years earlier in the African desert." There are more examples from the ancient world. There's the Egyptian story of Horus's great weapon, and there's a 3 square mile radioactive zone in Jodhpur, India. A layer of radioactive dirt or dust was unburied when trying to build an apartment complex there. The complex was canceled, however. In 1983, it was on record stating that skin, bone, and prostate cancer was significantly increased in this area to the rest of the country. In 2016, when they found this dust or ash or whatever it was that was buried, instead of building an apartment complex, the Indian Defense Research and Development Organization built a lab over the radioactive area and appear to be developing a drone-mounted radioactivity sensor. So is it possible that in the 4.5 billion years of Earth's existence that humans, or perhaps something altogether else, reached a pinnacle of scientific expertise, mastered atomic technology, and not unlike within our own blink of modern history, turned that technology onto each other? Well, we seem to do it without even so much as a second thought, so I don't see why they wouldn't have seemed to do it the same. And in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 9, it says, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun." But I'll leave that for you to think about. Join me next week. We're going to talk about psychic phenomena and some of the seers, the great seers, documented throughout history. And in the meantime, thank you for helping me take the occult and the apocalypse into just the hidden and the revealed. I'll see you next week.